Hello my friends, hope you are well. In my never-ending quest to eliminate my ever-expanding pile of shame, I've decided to finally paint up this Briar Queen miniature and give her a nice scenic display base. This is how she came out, and this, my friends, is how I did it.
Swamp Rat Miniatures.
So, I've had this mini for quite a while actually. It was just one from the metric shit ton of Nighthorn miniatures I got from the Mortal Realms magazine subscription thingy before I had to cancel it because my house was becoming infested with spooky little sprues. But yeah, I always really like the look of this one. I'm not sure why, as it's not an especially interesting mini, especially compared to some of the other ones Games Workshop makes. I just think she's a cool little ghoul. Now, I'm going to stick her onto a nice little display diorama, nothing too crazy, just something to put on my shelf so I can appreciate the mini. So I've made a start by carving up some XPS foam I've attached to a wooden base and adding a few bits of scenery. I've made a bunch of these smaller dioramas recently and they're quickly becoming my favourite things to make. Obviously, compared to the larger dioramas, they're a lot easier to make because there's less physical space to cover, meaning less physical components and details to make. But they are still quite challenging because you have a much more confined space and limited set of metaphorical tools to work with to make a cool little scene or story. A while ago I'd made another small diorama of a really cluttered and busy survivalist basement, and I think that worked well because there were so many little details squished into one tiny area. But for this diorama I wanted to go in the complete opposite direction, still keeping to the smaller size but keeping it really sparse when it comes to the scenery and details I'm adding. Kind of in a little experiment to see how little we can add to a small diorama but still be left with something interesting to look at. So, as you just saw, all I've done for this one is whack down an old crumbling wall, a happy little tree, a couple of gravestones with some raised mounds, and a lonely shovel. I then applied some texture paste to the ground and the tree, and a mixture of PVA and paint around the sides of the foam so it wouldn't melt when I primed it. Like I said, quite sparse on the details, just enough to frame in our ghoulish girl, and now we're ready for painting already. Crazy. I thought I'd start with the scenery bits first and do the miniature last because it would be really annoying to get her all nice and bright and finished, then slop a big glob of muddy brown paint onto her by accident. So I made a start by giving the tree a nice dark brown coat and then gave the wall and the gravestones a fairly dark grey base coat too. I then used a couple of lighter grey paints to add a bit of wear and tear on the stone pieces to get those looking a bit more interesting, and then gave the ground a dry brushing using some muddy brown with a slightly lighter tone on the grave mounds to help them stand out a bit. After that, I cracked out some black, brown and green washes to start adding some more definition and depth to our scenery pieces. And I was sloshing them here and sloshing them there, just having a good time, you know, getting all wet and wild with it, letting the creative juices flow from me onto the diorama and then into your eyeballs as you watch this video. And once said juices have dried off, I give the tree a quick dry brushing to bring out some of that texture, and I'm looking at it all thinking it's still not quite right. The washes are good, but I want more. I want moss, baby. I need moss. And here is the answer. Magic Mossy Cheat Juice, or Dirty Down Moss, as it's more actually officially called. I'd used the Dirty Down Rust a while ago for my Fallout Master diorama, and it worked really well, so I thought I'd give the moss a go too. I stashed the pot down my pants for a while and used the hairdryer to make sure everything else was warm, and then coated this onto everything I thought deserved some mossy loving. And I was applying this quite heavily actually, because you can come back in with a damp cotton bud afterwards to wipe away any unwanted excess and get a really nice blend between the mossy and now not so mossy areas. And there we have it! Quick, easy and good looking moss with a side helping of a solvent induced headache. Well, I'm kind of joking, but also not really. This stuff is surprisingly fumey for such a tiny little pot, so make sure you have good ventilation. Anyway, I gave the ground a wash with some Nuln Oil and a dry brushing to pick up the texture, and then just when you thought I was finished with the moss, BAM! It's back again. Usually I'd use a kind of fine flock on the ground to simulate moss or other small grassy patches, but I thought I'd give this another go to see if it can save me a bit of time and still get a good effect. And it did look pretty weird when it dried, to be fair. It was way too uniform, but that's kind of down to me applying it really thickly and uniformly across everything. But after I wiped a bunch of it away, we had a much more natural and varied looking finish, and one I was pretty happy with. So yeah, that's our scenery painting done for now. I'll come back at the end to add some more finishing touches, but now, my friends, we're ready to paint up our main ghoul herself, Her Majesty, the Queen of Briars. Now, surprise, surprise, as always, I wasn't really sure how I wanted to paint this mini up. The colour scheme Games Workshop did is just really boring, to be honest. Don't get me wrong, it's really nice and crisp, like all their paint jobs are, and way better than what I can do most of the time. But yeah, I felt like this mini deserved a bit of extra pizzazz. I've painted a bunch of Nighthawk minis in the past, and I always go for a much brighter and bolder and debatably more garish paint scheme than the Games Workshop ones, and I'll be doing that again today. And although I didn't have a plan, I knew I wanted some nice purples with some pinky highlights for the main body of the mini. In my head, the separate row parts were going to look quite distinctly different from each other, but still use the same few base colours, but in the end they ended up looking pretty damn similar actually. The veil on top was supposed to be a nice pinky colour fading down to a brighter white, but what we got was really more purple and pink action with a trace of white in there too. But yeah, they're not all going to be masterpieces, so I'll make the best of it and add some nice bright contrasting areas with the skin, which I painted into a nice spectrally blue colour. I did a few rose gold metallic details here and there, and then I also painted up this viney spell thing she's casting out into a nice bright green, bordering on yellow in the highlighted areas with some nice little pink coloured roses. And this was probably my favourite section of the whole mini diorama ensemble. I just loved how much the colours contrasted with the darker background once they were finished. And I think this paired with the brighter colours in the skin tones also helped to distract from the from the kind of merging together purple colours of the robes. So that was a plus, definitely. So that was almost all of our painting done, except I'd pretty much forgotten about this shovel existing. I think the residual bits of dry brushing it caught when I was doing the scenery helped it to blend in quite nicely, so it was kind of invisible to my eye at this point. But I just gave that an extra bit of love on the handle with some scratchy little wooden brown highlights. And that was officially the end of our painting, meaning it was time to add the last few little details. First up, I wanted to add some kind of foliage to this tree, so I draped some polyfiber over the branches, then made up a mixture of watered down PVA and some green and brown paints. I splooshed some of this swamp goo onto the fibres to secure them in place and also to give them a bit of extra funk and gnarliness, then sprinkled on a tiny bit of fine flock too. This is probably my favourite foliage for making spooky or swampy looking trees, and you can also use it as a hanging moss or vines for ruins or any other little bits of scenery like that, so it's a quite cool little technique. I'll let you have that one for free. And next up is my mandatory shrub, grass and flower tuft planting that I do on every diorama with any semblance of nature on it. And I wasn't sure how much of this to add really, because I did quite like the effect the dirty down moss was giving me on the ground. In the end I felt like maybe I added a few too many tufts, but I'd be interested to hear what you guys think too. I do like the little lilac flower tufts as I think they complement the paint scheme quite well. But should I have added less tufts? You know, less of the other tufts? Have I got too many tufts? Which tufts do you love? Which tufts do you hate? What is the correct ratio of tufts per square inch of diorama? You know, these are the kind of things that keep me up at night. So talk to me about tufts, people. Anyway, I've calmed down a bit now. So lastly, I take a bit of my green wash out, a Chthonian camo shade in this case, and I use this to darken down the shrubs and tufts I've added, as well as the hanging moss foliage on the tree. I think this step just helps to tie everything together a bit and mute some of those brighter colours that were standing out before. Now, pretend you haven't just watched this entire thing being made, and let's see how it came out. There we go, another little fun diorama as far as I'm concerned. This one was a ton of fun to make as always, and is far from perfect also as always. But I've been enjoying these smaller dioramas so much, and I'm really glad that I finally got this miniature off the sprue and onto a cool little display. As I kind of touched on earlier, I'm not fully happy with the colour scheme. I'd probably do it a bit differently if I ever paint her again, but there are elements of it that I really do love. My favourite part of this is the skin tone and the viney rose spell thing. I just really love how much they contrast with the rest of the diorama. And I also love this little shovel here. I don't know why, it's literally nothing special, but I just think it's a really cool little detail that fits with the graveyard scene, so I'm happy with that. As always, if you enjoyed this then please subscribe, leave a like or a comment, let me know what your favourite part of the diorama is, or tell me why it sucks and what you would have done better, or just tell me your RuneScape username and password so I can complete Monkey Madness for you and then steal all your possessions from your bank. I have been your friendly neighbourhood swamp rat, and I will see you very soon with another video. See ya!